Good day, everyone. I'll give a few minutes for others to get joined in. I guess we're a couple minutes past. We should go ahead and get started. I just got a message from Dowell a little bit ago saying that he was going to be a bit late joining, so we'll see if we get. It's a slight bummer because I think he would have been one of the primary things on the agenda. I'll copy paste the agenda link just in case anybody needs it, but I think you all know where it is. It's linked all over in the standard places. The main thing on the agenda today was to continue discussion around the KEP proposal. Last meeting, I was not able to attend, but based on the recording and notes, it looks like there was primarily discussion around removing what Dovell had initially proposed around supporting jumping releases and a changed, I guess a changed deprecation promotion policy around that. So it looks like yesterday he did update the document to have that removed, but other than that, doesn't look like there's been other commentary or discussion on the document. So I don't know what else there is to discuss just at the moment, or if he's had any side conversations with anybody there. Any thoughts or comments from anybody?
I had taken a quick pass at it, and a lot of the comments that he and I talked about looks like are either outstanding or he made the changes yesterday. I thought your questions about connecting the proposal to like actual users that would benefit from this was a good comment.
So we got our survey data, and Dovell had done some summarizing of it, but there was like a second pass set of stuff that he had wanted to mention. Oh, Dovell just joined. So while we were just discussing kind of outstanding comments and things on the KEP document, and yeah, anything that you want to share with us on it?
Hey, yes. So I've not made much progress there, but I think I took some of Jordan's comments and I striked off not just Jordan, but everybody was suggesting that we don't need, we should not block this proposal with the, upgrades as a prerequisite, and, we should probably discuss upgrades more in a separate place. So I think I took it off and made some edits based on some of the suggestions were asking to strike off some of the sections, so I removed those. Anything that was, so those are the only progress I've made on the draft yet. Lost. Yep. Was there anything specific that we wanted to discuss on that?
Jordan, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, as we start to turn this into a concrete proposal, like starting to reach out to the SIGs that would need to adjust processes or staffing or whatever, and start copying them into this and getting them to list out, if we did this, what would the implications be? So what we have now is kind of a good, here's a thing we want to do statement, but to evaluate it and get it accepted and actually get it implementable, we need to call out what will we do, or what will someone do to accomplish this. So like architecture for the deprecation policies, and release and testing for the patch manager, staffing, and CI impact. Just start getting those. It doesn't have to be fancy at first, right? But to start listing out bullet points of what would it look like to actually do this.
Agreed. I think those are good suggestions. I think I'm going to remove some of more prerequisites. I think some of those were not prerequisites, but some of the impact areas. If I think we do not exact. I mean, yeah. So I don't have the doc in front of me. I'm just returning from a dentist. Do you have the link? Can someone share the link in the chat? I can open it. Oh, okay. I think I found it. So I think the API stability area, I do not know what bullet points I can put there. I do not, with respect to extending the release. So I've added there because when I was thinking of upgrades, this was one of the things that was required. If you want to upgrade, you want to make sure component standardization and API stability were important. So if anybody has any thoughts on whether this should be the impact and an impact area, it would be great. Or we should just strike it off. It doesn't matter for a yearly support cadence. This is not, this KEP does, I mean, this particular impact areas does not have place in this KEP.
I see that as a parallel effort. Like if we're talking about supporting any two versions and making sure that the upgrade from one to the other is tested and the skew between one and the other is tested, like all of those are things that we already need to do and do to some extent, but could improve. And so whether or not we add one more release to the list of releases we support, to me seems like a parallel thing to testing and supporting a given pair of releases well.
Yep. So the 1 and 4, there are 4 prerequisites or improvements there. I think both of them don't have a place in this KEP, according to me.
Yeah. So the questions that I would like to see, and I'll add some of these into the doc as well. Like, are we just talking about tacking on one more release, or are we talking about widening the supported skew between kubelets and API servers? Right now, the supported skew is 2 versions, so that the oldest supported kubelet works with the newest supported API server. That's why that skew is the way it is. And so if we're talking about tacking on one more release, would we then say a 3-version skew from kubelet to API server is allowed, and what tests would we need to get in place to make sure that that works? So yeah, I'll take a pass through, kind of looking at each area and at some of the questions we can kick out to the SIG architecture or SIG node for components like that.
Yeah. Do you have edit access for this doc?
Yes, it looks like I do. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think from better tooling around patching and release, I see a lot of good effort right now happening. At least I see there's a project board with stories that actually connect to this. Um, uh, Automation around how we do releases, how we build images, how we store our older artifacts. All of those are being done right now, so it would be good to. I'll probably list them under better tooling and patch of better tooling patch for patching and release.
Yeah, if you want to link to those from the document, that would help as well. Like
Yeah.
just when we're evaluating the cost of this,
Yeah.
if we say it's going to be more work for patch releases, but we have tooling that's like driving down the cost of those things, that'd be good to know. Thanks.
Yeah. So that's and improved test and front tests is very vague. I remember last meeting, Jordan, you had a specific point on how we should improve tests. I don't remember it exactly. And there was no note taker. It's not in the notes. Maybe you want to repeat that.
I'm trying hard to remember.
As we're chatting, I'm making comments in the kept document right now, not in the meeting minutes, but
Okay.
reconstruct the 2 weeks ago unless I go back to the video again and do it.
I think the SKU testing I was talking about was more around API. It wasn't really related to adding support for another release.
Yeah. I think that's why I'm trying to completely remove those that do not make sense in this. If you're only talking about one more release in this cap, then we should remove everything else that does not make sense. I mean, those are important initiatives, probably deserve a separate document. This one, I agree.
It sounds to me like maybe that section would just be a bit more clear if it was called something other than more improvements. It's like flow-on effects or something like that. That possible downstream impacts of this decision or something like that.
Yeah, from when I was writing this, I was thinking about how we do the. I mean, we have dashboards that we have 3 columns that we monitor in SIG release: the informing, the all, and the blocking. I do not know what is the reason to persist with /all -all. From last 3 releases, I've never seen it green, completely green, mostly red actually. So I think those are some of the places where if you add one more release, you're adding one more confusion. And also understanding what kind of board, I mean, when we do patch releases, there is no documentation or information on say, okay, I'm looking at this blocking and this informing whenever I'm releasing even a patch, like 1.15, 1.14 patch, I'm doing this. So that's what I meant by improvements. But yeah, you're right. It's very vague and broad. So anything can be called an improvement.
I think SIG release has been pretty clear on the split of those buckets. Blocking has a fairly specific criteria. The informing is stuff from which signal comes that doesn't meet the blocking criteria as documented. And then all has been a bucket in which to throw effectively orphan jobs at this point that aren't supported, but rather than, there's a lot of resistance to just simply deleting them, because at the point that they're deleted and you look at the testing and you say, oh, blocking and informing hypothetically are all green, we're good to go. But actually there's a lot of gaps, and the things that are in those all boards are at least a reminder of the technical debt we have through absence of similar or comparable testing. So kind of a reminder that we need to be inspired by what's on those boards and make actually good and supported, maintained test cases that are equivalent to those to get the type of signal that we're missing. With respect to the patch release process, I believe that is fully documented on how and what the patch branch folks look at. I'm just pulling that up.
So so I've seen all being used and ignored. actually, the dashboard, and multiple times the discussions have been, do you know what to do with /- all? And they said, I don't know. I mean, I asked all my test infra leads and others over Slack, and they always told me that, we don't care about the board over there. So it kind of felt like people who cared, I mean, yeah, I think from nomenclature, blocking, informing have good information, and /- all sounds like a dump yard of, I don't know what to do with this, but I'm too scared to delete it. So it's like a storeroom, things like, screws and stuff that we don't want to throw away. We assume that we might need it in the future. We put them there. So it felt like that. So I think we might need some cleaning there. Does it really connect with this particular cap is also something we should look at, saying, okay, does it really hamper one more release, or what does it do?
Yeah, the patch release team documentation says you look at SIG release version blocking, and that's it. So it's pretty clear in the documentation, I believe.
Okay.
Operationally, from what I've seen over the last 9 months being involved with it, I feel like that document reflects what is done. But I think where Jordan had started was we need to either engage the SIG or engage the people in these roles. So I mean, I can review it once from a patch release perspective, but I can go through that document and double check if we had a fourth one, what would the impact be? Off the top of my head, I think the impact would be small, and this is kind of why last year I started pushing for patch release to be a team as opposed to single people on each branch. The majority of the patches that come by are cherry picked to each of the branches. Now that may be a statement right now on just our overall maturity and stability of the code base, that bugs once exposed are ones that have been around for a while, and it may be that over time we get to a place where the things that we're patching are only more recent as we're doing more isolated enhancements, and the bugs are within those and only in newer releases. I feel like that may be starting to happen a bit with 115. So if that trend were to continue, that could mean that there's less duplication of effort across those branches, which means a higher cost. But right now, the effort, I mean, just glancing through, 80% or something of the cherry picks we look at are on all three branches. So you have, it's almost as if we're supporting one branch at that point today.
That's music to my ears, because feels very sorted. Yeah, I think it would be great to get experts to actually jot that impact there. One more thing was motivation. Apart from the data that we have from the survey, I remember we discussing that users, we always assumed, or we always discussed that one more release will help users. Users have been asking for it. I do remember that discussion happening here, but I've not heard which users or what was the data behind that. Providing that information in the motivation section would be great. I don't have reference for that, but I think we did discuss that in the past, saying, okay, adding one more release is something that the users have been asking. This phrase or this phrase is similar to that I've been hearing in this group. What's the source of that data? I mean,
So
conversations?
That's why we said we wanted to do a survey, and the survey would be part of how we make a fact-based proposal for change.
Mm-hmm. But I think we still have to, I mean, we have so many conversations with customers in conferences here and there, and those feedback should also be captured somewhere, or, or represented somewhere. Even if it's not been documented somewhere, we can always say, okay, this was from the conversations we had over here as a group. Because not everybody fills a survey, but sometimes the verbal feedback you get from people is also very valuable.
Yeah, so we can have both quantitative and qualitative indicators. So if there were direct survey responses that map to this, that's great. If there are also categories of customers or types of environments that are regulated or have very specific windows for upgrades, just describing who is this for, both numerically and just in text would be fun. I think we should do both. So under details, I started adding, just kind of off the top of my head, the types of things I would expect us to consider, and I'm trying to call out the relevant SIGs so that we can take these questions to them and also solicit additional feedback. Say, are there things, processes, or costs that we are missing, or benefits that we're missing that you'd like to add into this? So feel free to expand on these or add to these. And then once we kind of have a set of these, we can shard them out by SIG and kind of take them to those SIGs, mailing lists, or meetings.
Yep. I think from the KEP has this structure of summary motivation, but I like your terminology, Jordan, where you said benefits and costs. We should probably separate them out and saying these are the benefits, these are the costs we see. And that way it's much more easier to document. Some of the benefits can be anecdotal, some of them can be like, adding one more release is going to give us a year of support. That's an anecdotal. I mean, it comes from the fact, but we are still making a phrase. And what is the benefit of doing it needs to be more specific. So I think having a section that says benefits and costs would be much more useful. Another question I had about this, so this is a KEP. So ultimately, whenever we propose a KEP in that release, I mean, we're trying to push something in that particular release. If we propose this KEP across, what's our intention when we want to have this implementation if everything goes fine? Are we saying, hey, this KEP is for this release or next release, or?
Well, I mean, the KEP deadline for this release has passed. So if there's anything that is going to affect components, that would, at the earliest, it would be 117. If it also comes down to what the blockers are. If the blockers to these things are primarily, test gaps and staffing issues, then you don't need you don't need a KEP by feature freeze to go write a new test. Like, you can do that anytime during the release. And so we can start doing this work. If there are things, especially around SKU, I anticipate what would likely happen is we would identify a target SKU that we want to support and then reach that by release, just not dropping support for an old version where we normally would have. So I called out kube control API server SKU. Like right now, it's a ±1 version. If I think an ideal would be for the current version of kube control to support speaking to all the supported API servers. And so a way to do that is over the next 2 or 3 releases, just set up SKU jobs that run the CLI suite against one more version of SKU, and then fix any bugs that we find and stop breaking anything that we were breaking accidentally. And then over multiple releases, we get there. So some of these things we can do immediately with tests. Some of these things will be incremental, but identifying them all and kind of figuring out what release timeframe. Some of them will be multiple releases to get there, which is fine.
Okay, let's finish the document and then decide. I mean, we will know what's the impact.
And just one comment there on what Jordan was saying. I think that's a fairly straightforward path, like from a SIG release or release team perspective. You add a test at any point. You can get it into release informing if there's a rationale for it, like what was just described. At the point that errors have been consistently resolved, you promote it to release blocking, and there's an established criteria for that. And having met it and demonstrably viewable through the history of it, that should be a straightforward thing to accomplish.
I feel like we also are editing this document live. Should we also have other separate meetings where we actually do this as a team again, apart from bi-weekly?
So talking about the timeline of things, maybe that brings up the next thing on the agenda actually for the working group as a whole. We have 2 weeks till the contributor summit session proposals are due. I think we should put out a proposal to discuss this at the contributor summit at KubeCon. That leaves us, we're basically 3 months, 3 months from yesterday is the date that would be. I think if we're meeting every other week, that gives us 6 times to iterate face-to-face on this document. That could be enough, depending on how much we do asynchronously outside of the meetings, but it could take more. But what do people think about having as a goal something for a fairly good draft that's been discussed with stakeholder SIGs and kind of bringing it to a broader discussion at KubeCon and Contrib Summit?
I think that's a great idea. I felt that the one that we had at KubeCon NA last year was that was a really good discussion, and yeah, we certainly had more people there from than them are normally on the calls as well. So it was a good chance to get more people sort of aware of what we're doing.
Yep, I think KubeCon is going to be a great place for talking to all the SIG leads also. If they see any concern, it will be much more easier to understand those face-to-face. I hope we would have resolved everything by then, actually. But if there is something outstanding, a face-to-face conversation would be great. The biggest use of this, I think, is when we go to KubeCon and we tell people that, hey, this is how we are trying to help them, and can get the community's feedback verbally on what how they feel about this proposal or this approach is, I think, the biggest value. It's like reaching out to the end user community and saying, hey, this is how we are changing the project, and how do you think about it? I think that's why I think what you're proposing makes sense, and probably we should spend more time on the KEP and on the proposal for KubeCon as the main activity for the rest of this particular meetings that we are going to have.
I can go ahead and submit just a short paragraph abstract saying that we want to bring this KEP idea to the Contrib Summit for broader discussion and get that in the hopper.
I can't remember. Did we put our hands up for any other like sessions in the conference proper?
In the call for papers or presentations, I'm not aware of any. We hadn't formally done one. No, we hadn't done like a SIG or working group deep dive or intro session. We have in prior ones, and it generated a little bit of interest, but not a whole lot. And I think as the work group is time boxed initially for this year, I think that next step feels more natural to have something as a proposal at the contributor summit to the project's contributors and developers. And if then we're getting an indication to go ahead and move forward in some specific way, then I think at next year's like KubeCon Europe, do a final sort of recap. Here's what we've done, and by then potentially in 118 or 19 possibly, we've gotten to the point where these tests that we had declared have been passing long enough that we make the formal declaration as a project, and at that point maybe we do a broader something in the broader conference track to just sort of, like Dhaval was saying, to let the ecosystem know that this has happened.
Yeah, I think that sounds fine to me. I just wanted to have asked the question.
Yeah, I think also the experience of having us, I think in the next 6 months of taking this idea and going to each SIGs, we are a unique working group that spans across SIGs kind of. That's a good experience to also share with the community saying, okay, we have what it takes to have a working group that spreads across 6. That's gonna be a good talk to, I'm sure. Or you can say, how do you convince all the 6 to agree on one thing? That would be a great topic.
I know that I saw some proposals for the main CFP that were kind of in that direction for the community track. So it's, especially as the community grows, it's something where your kind of standard corporate contributor maybe comes and thinks, oh, hey, I'm going to get involved in Kubernetes and I'm going to drive this big change. And it's actually a whole lot more complicated than that. So yeah, that could be an interesting learning to share as well, Tan, sort of off on the side.
Yeah. And yeah, I think sometimes those are long-term values that we generate. So do we want to talk about future evolutions? Do we think, do we understand enough about this proposal to say how this will evolve?
At KubeCon this year?
No, I'm looking at the KEP document and I'm trying to think about this section.
In the KEP itself, yeah, I think that there's not like a future work section in the KEP template, but I feel like that's kind of a common part maybe of non-goals or the scoping aspects where people say we're doing this. Yes, there's this other stuff we could follow on perhaps with that to say that there's something for additional work here that could follow on is reasonable, because those things, I feel like if you don't put that in the KEP, you end up having lots of people regularly re-ask the questions, well, what about this? What about this? Why isn't it part of? And if you make it clear how and why you've scoped and that you're not precluding those things, I think that makes the review and discussion a little smoother, so you're not relitigating those things.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have anything on the KEP anymore.
So with respect to patch releases, the portion on getting feedback from SIG release, I will put that on the agenda for the next SIG release meeting, which will be next week, and I can bring some feedback back on that one. I feel like I can speak to it as a chair of SIG release and a member of the team, but I'm going to take it to the meeting and just get a little
What do you know
affirmation.
about release, Tim? Are you really that involved?
It's a community. We gotta I don't know. This KEP especially, like, you need broad buy-in.
Yeah.
Some of the things feel obvious maybe when you're in the middle of it, but yeah.
Do we want to have the sort of the benefits and the motivation really pinned down before we start taking this out to different audiences? I mean, don't get me wrong. I love it when people show up and tell me to do more work for unclear reasons, but not everyone does.
I think especially in the other areas, like, I mean, I can't hardly get a hold of anybody in SIG-Node most of the time. So like to have something very concrete, here's what we think the implications are. Yeah, I think that's critical. But for the release process stuff, I think it's not as much of an issue there. But yeah, for the other stakeholder SIGs that we'd want to talk to, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's also good for us to discuss because we have different people from different backgrounds in this group itself. We will be, if we can jot down the benefits and agree on them, it's a good shorter exercise saying that, okay, it will show us how we can get this, how to talk to other people about these benefits.
Okay, let's put names down beside who's gonna take these to the various SIGs. And once we get the motivation bits flushed out, then we'll take these and probably to mailing lists first, and then to a meeting, and then bring the feedback back here if there were things we missed, or concerns, or specific people who are willing to help with that effort. All that information would be useful.
So for the test and release ones, I'm putting some names there. Dhaval, you'd been looking at API server, if I recall correctly. Is that correct?
Yep, but we have Jordan here, so.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the SIGArch, and I can talk to SIGNode as well. And I'm already in SIG API machinery, so by all means, if anyone else wants to chime in on the threads or come to the meetings, please do. But I'm happy to kind of shepherd those out.
I'd kind of be interested too, but practically time zones make it not ideal.
I've also been involved in a SIG release and other, but I think with Tim Pepper here, I don't have to represent anyone else. Nobody else should be representing here.
It's fine and good to have others. Do you want to talk to SIG testing about what they imagine the cost of another branch would be?
Mm-hmm. Who is you here?
Sorry, you, Dhaval.
Yeah. Yeah. But we should start with saying, okay, what are the benefits? Can you add another section that says benefits, and all of us can list over there, and then the motivation sounds very abstract sometimes to me. When you go to a SIG and say, hey, this is what we are planning and these are the benefits, it's much easier. Then motivation is what started you to do it, but ultimately benefits are more concrete.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have a section that we all write there.
Is there any? I think Tim noted in the proposal section, but it probably belongs in the motivation section about the data that we got from the survey, justifying some of these things. If there's people mentioned that they would prefer a yearly cadence or something like that, then having it in, saying a yearly support cadence provides a cushion of at least a year of support, and then having, we had N% of people, of respondents to the survey, say that this is something they wanted or something like that.
Yeah. Also,
so anybody going to
support? Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, John.
Also, the 2 month overlap that was proposed, just explaining where that comes from. I think it actually makes sense. Like if you think about what a user is actually going to do, the day a .0 release is coming out, they're probably not going to go and upgrade all of their year-old annual upgrade cycle clusters to it. They're probably going to, let it soak in broad public adoption, maybe wait for the 0.1 release, which is 3-ish weeks later, and then they're gonna stage out, test and stage out their upgrade, which can take like a month. And so I think the 2 month overlap makes a lot of sense, but we should explain where that's coming from.
Yeah.
Also, we should explain what what was the support period actually mean. Full support across 9 months, like bug fixes, any kind of, or it's not clear or I've not read it properly. I'm sure Tim Pepper has something to say.
I didn't understand a lot of what you said. Your voice cut out.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was saying that we have 9 months of support today, and we do not yet define. We define, or it's like full support across 9 months. So bug fixes, security fixes, all of them are backported. So would that plus 2 months be similar support period, or is it only security critical fixes? What do we intend to provide in those 2 months?
Yeah, I think this is, again, something that we should work on defining better for the current 3 releases we support. And whatever, like, the things that should be going into patch releases are severe bugs and meaningful security fixes, and so that needs to be better defined in general, and I would expect the same definition to apply to this extra release. But yeah,
I think for the extra release, yeah, but that 2 months.
Out. You had started a discussion about this, so linking to that and saying, like, we really need to pin this down if we're going to support stuff longer. We need to pin down exactly what does support mean.
In the 2-month window, so so I think there's 2 things that need pinned down better. One, just any support 9-month period for a branch, or in-month period, whatever it is, the standard part that we declare. That does need nailed down better. But right now, I think part of the ambiguity is that we have deferred to the SIGs to declare what they feel is critical. And that's led to some fuzziness and differences between different SIGs. So yeah, that part needs better. But then in that period where the thing is technically out of support, but we haven't turned down the CI, there's been this speculative imagination that, like, what if there's some late breaking CVE or something, and could we go ahead and just fix that critical security issue? So that I feel like people like the idea of some bug fix window and then a little trailing, or maybe not even little, like at some period it's not critical bug fixes anymore, but just critical security fixes, that there's sort of a tiering of support there. I think those are kind of 2 separate discussions, better defining what our bug fix is and if or when we should have a security only fix window.
Almost like a deprecation window then for the last release in the release train, right?
Yeah, you've got your support period, and then like a
then you've got like a
ejection bailout period.
Yeah.
And that 2-month is sort of like, I feel like people imagine that period right now, and it's a bit less than 2 months, but that's kind of what people infer is happening there. We've never actually executed on it, to my knowledge, though, thankfully.
Okay. Yeah, so nailing down the policy in general, and then saying, does anything change, like, as a release is going out of support? Does it cinch down to just severe security issues? Like, yeah.
Cough, gRPC CVEs.
The HTTP2 ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a thought exercise, if we still had 112 CI going right now, would we have tried to backport those? I'm inclined in this case to say no, just because 113's was already awkward enough. But I don't know.
I mean, this starts to get into, like, our dependencies. Like, at some point, we're on an older version of Go. Like, the Go fixes didn't even go into older versions past 111.
But Go 111 is what our 113 branch was on. I haven't looked at what 112 was on, but I'm guessing it might have been on 110, in which case we wouldn't have had the ability probably to do this. And the depth management for 113 was a bit ugly, and it obviously would have only been worse before.
Yeah, 111 was on Go 110. 112 was on Go 110 as well. yeah. I mean, some of the dependency stuff is going to get better 1.15 on as we got off of GoDeps. So at least we'll have workable dependency updates. But yeah, I mean, the Go version is one of many dependencies that could have a security bug. And so that's actually something we need to look at. So we've called out some of our dependencies like etcd and Go. If we extended support for one more release, does that put us out of alignment with those? And what's our plan for that? Like, what does it mean for Kubernetes to be supported for a year for security releases if one of the dependencies it has is only supported for 6 months or 9 months?
The duration of Golang support matches what we're talking about, except it's skewed on the calendar.
Right, it's not 14 months, it's a hard 12 months.
Yeah, and then because of when it is, it actually ends up being potentially less than 9 relative to where we start our 9.
Should we have a conversation with Go folks? Because we can all discuss it, but I'm not.
I think practically, trying to convince every one of the third-party dependencies to align with our schedule is untenable. And what that drives us to is, for our project, figuring out how to safely manage moving those dependencies forward. With Golang, it's starting to happen. We're getting closer to a point where we can and are moving our Go stuff forward sooner to ensure that we don't, because we were having these realizations where the Go that we were using was out of support towards the end of our support window. So there's an understanding, at least for that one, that we need to be moving that along at a minimum regularly, like even tracking, like if today a patch release of Go comes out, go ahead and update all of our uses to that, where before we didn't do that. And even just last week, we were like on the two older branches, I think we're skipping forward like 5 Go patch releases because we hadn't followed them. So the more that we follow them, the incremental change is less, the risk is less typically, and it's easier to have confidence in moving forward. The question though would be on major releases, if, when, how comfortable can we become on bumping things forward to major releases, and in cases not like Go, maybe where they don't have as clear of a policy, or that's not so almost closely aligned with us.
Yeah, I think for Kubernetes patch releases, should we update major release of Go? Would doing that require, if there is a syntactical change, you would still, the change on the project itself would be much more than just fixing a critical bug or trying to stay in line with support. It could be
Yeah, I mean, the syntactical changes are very, very rare. Typically, those are something like Go format changed its preferred indent style. The changes that are more common are like things around servers, like the Go 1.13 update will require a larger minimum key size, which is still like well inside what you should have been using anyway for security purposes. But those are the types of changes that ripple more, require more test changes and things like that.
or change in packages, interfaces, deprecations.
The Go language does not remove packages or interfaces in general.
Okay.
I mean, other dependencies do willy-nilly. We do willy-nilly, but the Go language, the standard library, doesn't. And I also linked out to the document where we had started gathering kind of a list of those dependencies and comparing our support windows for reference.
We have 9 minutes left.
I'm just taking notes, typing, trying to keep up with the discussion.
I'm going to remove the possible from the impossible impacts because I'm sure these are impacts.
I think we should have an impossible impact section. Unicorns will no longer be able to have diamond tiers.
Oh, I'm crying diamond tears now at the thought. Boo-hoo.
This is getting recorded and will be posted on the internet, and your grandchildren will look at these videos.
Hey, don't be silly is not in the code of conduct.
My kids are already embarrassed by me, I'm sure, so whatever.
Yeah, it's almost 3 o'clock in the morning for me. It's very hard not to be silly.
All right.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'll go ahead and get a submission in for Contrib Summit. And so, Dawali, you had asked if we should maybe meet face-to-face a little more often over the coming weeks. Did anybody else have any other thoughts versus trying to drive this through the document asynchronously with Google Docs?
Given that it looks like we kind of have a couple things to gather, and then most of the work is going to be going out to other SIGs, I kind of would rather actually get those meetings happening and wait until we have more to bring back from them to kind of pick up the pace on this. So if we can drive down the motivation piece and some of the rationale pieces, and then really try to get the SIG discussions going over the next couple weeks, I think that might be better.
That works for me. I have a lot of meetings, and I'm traveling some over these weeks as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think we could have.
I'm okay to have a quick look at, in the motivation section, we got a bit about looking back over the 2 LTS proposals that we've had previously. I'm okay to have a bit of a look over those docs and write something.
Yeah. And I think Globomit's proposal had a lot of had spawned into a lot of areas which even we are touching on right now. So yeah, thanks Nick for that pointer. I think we can get some good ideas from there too.
Yeah, so I'll at least do some summary, some summary notes. Although, Luby, I thought your document was pretty good, so I shouldn't be too hard. But yeah, that way I can just remind everybody about the stuff we talked about in that document.
Copy paste.
All right, I will. I'm gonna put a calendar reminder for myself next week, but I'll maybe we can try to activate a little bit more in the workgroup LTS Slack channel just to be chatting with each other as we're getting feedback and let folks know that there's changes in the doc and kind of be iterating a little bit more, just leaving some cookie crumbs for each other to know that motion is happening.
It's definitely a good signal for people who are not on this call that, we're not just sitting around doing nothing.
All right, well, I will post the meeting to YouTube afterwards, and thanks everybody, and I'll get that thing submitted to the Contrib Summit, and we'll get this document rolling more over a couple of months, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation then at KubeCon. Have a great day, everybody.
Sounds great.
Thanks.